The Great Hall of the Galactic Federation had never been so quiet. 3,000 delegates from 500 different species sat in perfect silence as the images played across the enormous view screen. Ambassador Zethrix of the Vorton Collective felt his 4 hearts beating faster than they had in centuries. His long, blue fingers gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly that the metal bent. On the screen, a human ship drifted through the darkness of space. It was small, barely 100 meters long, and it was broken. Half of its hull had been torn away by plasma fire. The life support systems were failing. The engines were dead. By every measure the Federation used, the ship was finished. But the humans inside were not. "This footage was captured 47 standard days ago," said High Chancellor Morix, her voice trembling slightly. The ancient Kelthian stood at the center of the speaking platform, her silver scales catching the light from the view screen. "The vessel is the human explorer ship named Persistence. It was attacked by raiders from the Outer Rim and left for dead." The footage continued. Through the broken hull, tiny figures in spacesuits could be seen moving about. They were welding. They were patching. They were working with tools that no other species would have brought on such a simple exploration mission. "The humans had no faster-than-light communication," Chancellor Morix continued. "No way to call for help. They were 17 light-years from the nearest inhabited system. Their food supplies were damaged. Their water recyclers were destroyed. They had perhaps enough resources to survive for 30 days. A murmur went through the crowd. 30 days, that was nothing. The distance involved would take at least 120 days to cross, even with the ship in perfect condition. "They survived for 47 days, the Chancellor said. "They repaired their ship using materials that should not have been possible to use for such repairs. They created a new water recycling system from components of their own equipment. They grew food in conditions that our scientists say could not support plant life. And yesterday, they arrived at Calthex Station." The view screen changed to show the battered ship limping into port. It was held together with metal patches, strange polymers, and what appeared to be the hull plating of a completely different vessel. Someone in the audience made a sound of disbelief. "They found the wreckage of a Melian cargo hauler along the way," Chancellor Morix explained. "The Melians had been dead for centuries. The humans took what they needed and kept going." Ambassador Zethrix finally found his voice. "Chancellor, with respect, why are you showing us this? Humans are known for their survival instincts. This is not new information." The Chancellor turned to face him directly. Her ancient eyes held something that Zethrix had never seen in them before. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was fear. "Ambassador, in 400 years of recorded galactic history, no species has ever survived what those humans survived. Not once. We have sent expeditions into the void with better equipment, better supplies, and better crews. None of them came back. The humans had nothing but their persistence, and they made it home." She paused to let her words sink in. "The Galactic Federation has always operated on the assumption that we could contain the humans. We believed that their expansion into the galaxy could be controlled through trade agreements, territorial limits, and diplomatic pressure. We were wrong." Another delegate stood up. This one was Thuric, the representative from the hive worlds of Draxus. His insectoid body clicked and buzzed as he spoke. "What are you suggesting, Chancellor? That we change our policies toward the humans?" "I am suggesting," Chancellor Morix said slowly, "that we reconsider everything we thought we knew about them." The footage on the screen changed again. This time it showed a human colony world called New Hope. The planet had been struck by an asteroid 3 years ago. The impact had killed 60% of the population and destroyed most of the infrastructure. The Federation had offered to relocate the survivors to a safer world. The humans had refused. "They are rebuilding," the Chancellor said. "From nothing they are rebuilding. They lost their children, their families, their homes, and they stayed. They dug shelters in the ash. They planted crops in poisoned soil. They refused to give up. A Kelthian scientist named Varric stood up from the research delegation section. "Chancellor, I have studied humans for 200 years. Their biology is not exceptional. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the fastest or the smartest. They do not have natural armor or weapons. By all measurable standards, they should be a minor species." And yet, the Chancellor prompted, and yet they have expanded to 47 worlds in less than 300 years. They have survived disasters that would have ended any other species. They have fought wars against enemies that outmatched them in every way and somehow won. Varric's voice was filled with something between admiration and horror. "I do not understand how they do it." "I do," said a quiet voice from the back of the hall. Everyone turned to look. The speaker was a human. He was small compared to most of the delegates, with brown skin and gray hair. He wore the simple uniform of a human diplomatic attaché. "Forgive me," he said, stepping forward into the light. "My name is James Chen. I am a historian." Chancellor Morix gestured for him to approach the speaking platform. "Please, Historian Chen, enlighten us." James Chen walked slowly to the center of the hall. He was calm, almost relaxed, despite the thousands of eyes watching him. When he reached the platform, he turned to face the assembly. "You want to know how we survive," he said. "You want to know why we keep going when everything tells us to stop. The answer is simple." He paused, looking around at the faces of 100 different species. "We do not know how to quit." A confused murmur went through the crowd. The Thuric delegate clicked impatiently. "That is not an answer. Every species knows how to stop when a situation becomes impossible." James Chen smiled. It was a strange smile, neither happy nor sad. "You are correct. Every species knows when to stop. That is what makes us different. We never learned." He began to walk slowly around the platform. "On our homeworld, Earth, we faced extinction many times. Ice ages that covered our planet in frozen death. Plagues that killed half of our population. Wars that destroyed our cities and poisoned our land. Every time, the logical choice was to give up, to accept that we had lost." He stopped walking and faced the assembly again. "We never made the logical choice. We kept going. We kept fighting. We kept trying. Not because we were brave or strong, but because we simply could not imagine doing anything else. Giving up was never a real option for us." Ambassador Zethrix leaned forward in his seat. "But that makes no sense. Surely there were times when surrender was the only rational response." "Of course there were," James Chen agreed. "And we fought anyway. We suffered anyway. We died by the millions, and the survivors picked up the tools of the fallen and kept working." He shrugged. "I did not say it was smart. I said it was who we are." Chancellor Morix stepped closer to the human. "Historian Chen, do you understand why your answer disturbs us?" James Chen nodded slowly. "I believe I do, Chancellor. You are afraid because you cannot predict us. You cannot calculate the point at which we will break because that point does not exist. You are afraid because you have no leverage over a species that will not stop, no matter what you do to them." The silence in the Great Hall was absolute. "You are correct," Chancellor Morix finally said. "We are afraid, and I believe that fear is justified." She turned back to the assembly. 300 years ago, when humans first discovered faster-than-light travel, we debated whether to welcome them into the Federation or to destroy them before they could become a threat. We chose diplomacy because we believed that humans were simply another young species finding their way in the galaxy. We believed that they would eventually learn their place. She gestured at the view screen. "We were wrong. The humans have not learned their place because they do not believe they have one. They believe that any place in the galaxy can be theirs if they are willing to work hard enough and long enough to claim it. And they are willing. They are always willing." The Thuric delegate buzzed angrily. "Then what do you suggest? That we destroy them now while we still can?" Chancellor Morix shook her head. It is too late for that. The humans have spread too far, and any attack would only make them more determined. We have seen what happens when humans face extinction. They become more dangerous, not less. She looked at James Chen, who stood quietly on the platform. No, the Chancellor said. We must do something far more difficult than destroying them. We must learn to live with them. The emergency session of the Federation Council lasted for 17 hours. Delegates argued, pleaded, threatened, and negotiated until their voices were raw and their minds were exhausted. Through it all, James Chen sat quietly in his observer's chair, watching and listening. He had sent a message to Earth immediately after the session began. The response had come back quickly. The human government had been tracking the situation for months and had anticipated this moment. They had a plan. By the 15th hour, the mood in the Great Hall had shifted. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something that looked almost like respect. Ambassador Zethrix was the first to propose it. If we cannot contain the humans, then we must partner with them. We must bind them to the Federation so tightly that they become invested in our survival as well as their own. The Thuric delegate clicked in protest. You speak of making them our equals. They are children in galactic terms. Their civilization is barely 1,000 years old. Their civilization has accomplished in 1,000 years what most species take 10,000 to achieve, Varix the scientist pointed out. Perhaps age is not the measure we should be using. The debate continued, but James Chen could see which way it was going. He allowed himself a small smile. When the final vote came, it was closer than anyone had expected. By a margin of just 47 votes, the Galactic Federation agreed to offer humanity full membership with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. James Chen rose from his chair and walked to the speaking platform one final time. Chancellor Morix handed him the traditional speaking staff, a crystal rod that had been used for these occasions for 3,000 years. On behalf of the human species, he said, his voice steady and calm, I accept this offer of partnership. We look forward to working alongside the great civilizations of this galaxy. He paused, and his smile grew just a little wider. We promise that we will never give up on you. The words hung in the air, carrying a weight that every delegate could feel. It was a promise and a warning, wrapped together in simple human language. The Galactic Federation had just made the most important decision in its history. They had chosen to embrace human persistence rather than fear it. Admiral Yanara of the 7th Fleet stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Celestial Judgment, and watched the human ships approach. There were only 12 of them, small vessels compared to her massive warships, but she felt her scales tighten with anxiety all the same. It had been 15 years since humanity had joined the Federation, and in that time, everything had changed. The humans had proven to be exactly what everyone had feared and hoped. They were relentless workers, brilliant innovators, and absolutely impossible to discourage. But they were also proving to be something else, something that the older species had not expected. They were proving to be loyal. The communication screen flickered to life, showing the face of a young human officer. She had dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that sparkled with barely contained energy. Admiral Yanara, the human said, snapping off a crisp salute. Captain Sarah Martinez of the human vessel Endurance, we received your distress call and came as fast as we could. Yanara felt something strange in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. Captain Martinez, the situation is dire. The Void Swarm has surrounded this system. My fleet is damaged and we cannot break through their lines. We have been trapped here for 3 weeks and our supplies are running low. The young human smiled. It was not a smile of amusement or cruelty. It was a smile of confidence. We know, Admiral, that is why we brought friends. Behind the 12 human ships, more vessels began to appear. Hundreds of them. ships from a dozen different human colonies, all racing toward the trapped fleet. How? Yanara whispered. The communications relay was destroyed. We could not send word to the human territories. Captain Martinez's smile grew wider. You did not need to, Admiral. We have been tracking the Void Swarm for months. We knew they would come here eventually. We have been waiting for them. The human ships began to spread out, forming a complex pattern that Yanara did not recognize. They were faster than any ship she had ever seen, darting through the void like predators scenting prey. Admiral, Captain Martinez said, I suggest you move your fleet to defensive positions around the central station. We will handle the Void Swarm. Yanara hesitated. The Void Swarm was the most feared enemy the galaxy had ever known. They consumed everything in their path, ships and stations and entire planets. No one had ever defeated them in open battle. But the humans were already moving, their ships racing toward the massive cloud of enemy vessels that surrounded the system. This is madness, her second-in-command whispered. They will be destroyed. Yanara watched as the first human ship reached the edge of the Void Swarm. It did not slow down. It did not hesitate. It plunged directly into the mass of enemy vessels, weapons firing in all directions. The Void Swarm reacted with fury, thousands of small attack craft converging on the single human ship. But by then, more human vessels had arrived. They formed a tight formation and punched through the enemy line like a knife through water. They are insane, her second-in-command said. Absolutely insane. Yanara shook her head slowly. No, they are human. The battle lasted for 6 hours. The human fleet took terrible losses. Ship after ship was destroyed, their crews fighting until the very last moment. But they never retreated. They never stopped attacking. They kept pushing forward, creating gaps in the Void Swarm's formation that allowed other ships to slip through. By the end, the Void Swarm had been scattered. For the first time in galactic history, they had been forced to retreat from a system they had claimed. The cost had been high. Of the 347 human ships that had joined the battle, only 212 survived. But they had done the impossible. Captain Martinez's ship was not among the survivors. The Endurance had been destroyed in the final push, its crew sacrificing themselves to create the opening that broke the Void Swarm's line. Yanara stood on her bridge and watched the human rescue ships arriving to search for survivors. She knew there would not be many. The humans had fought with everything they had, holding nothing back. A young human pilot was brought aboard her flagship, pulled from an escape pod that had drifted for hours in the debris field. He was barely conscious, his body broken and burned, but he was alive. Yanara went to see him in the medical bay. She stood beside his bed and watched him struggle to open his eyes. You won, she said softly. You defeated the Void Swarm. The young pilot managed a weak smile. We do not know how to lose, Admiral. He closed his eyes and drifted into unconsciousness. The medical staff rushed to stabilize him, their instruments beeping and flashing with urgent warnings. Yanara turned and walked slowly back to her bridge. Her second-in-command was waiting for her. What do we tell the Federation? He asked. Yanara looked out at the stars, at the debris of the battle that had just been fought, at the human ships still searching for their lost comrades. We tell them the truth, she said. We tell them that humanity has just changed everything. The news of the Battle of Kethros spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm had been defeated. For the first time, there was hope that the ancient enemy could be stopped. And everyone knew who was responsible. The humans had done what no one else could do. They had looked at an impossible situation and refused to accept that it was impossible. They had sacrificed hundreds of their own ships and thousands of their own lives to save a Federation fleet that was not even their own. In the halls of power throughout the galaxy, Leaders who had feared humanity began to see them differently. The persistence that had seemed so threatening now seemed like a gift, a quality that might save them all. James Chen, now the human ambassador to the Federation, watched the change with quiet satisfaction. He was older now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind still clear. "You knew this would happen," Chancellor Morix said to him one day, as they walked through the gardens of the Federation capital. "You knew that eventually we would need you." James smiled his strange, calm smile. "We hoped, we always hope, that is part of who we are." The Chancellor stopped walking and turned to face him. "Do you ever get tired? Does your species ever just want to rest, to accept things as they are?" James thought about the question carefully before answering. "We rest," he said finally. "We take breaks. We have moments of peace and contentment, but we never stop moving forward. We cannot. It is not in our nature." He looked up at the alien sky, at the strange stars that humans had once only dreamed of reaching. Every human child grows up hearing stories of our ancestors, stories of people who faced impossible odds and kept fighting, stories of those who failed and those who succeeded, and we learn from all of them. We learn that giving up means the end of everything, that as long as we keep trying, there is always a chance. Chancellor Morix was silent for a long moment. "I think I understand now," she said quietly. "You are not fearless. You feel fear just like the rest of us, but you have learned to keep moving despite the fear." James nodded. "Fear is useful. It tells us that something is dangerous, but it should not be allowed to make our decisions for us. We acknowledge it, we learn from it, and then we do what needs to be done anyway." They continued walking through the garden. The flowers were beautiful, a riot of colors from 100 different worlds. James paused to admire a particularly striking bloom, its petals shifting through shades of blue and purple. "The void swarm will return," Chancellor Morix said. "They always return, and when they do, they will be angrier than before. They will want revenge for their defeat." James reached out and gently touched one of the shifting petals. "Then we will fight them again," he said simply. "And if we lose that battle, we will fight them again after that, and again, until they understand that the only way to defeat humanity is to kill every last one of us, and even then I think our ghosts would probably keep fighting." Chancellor Morix made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "You are the strangest species the galaxy has ever known, James Chen." The old human smiled and withdrew his hand from the flower. "Thank you, Chancellor. We try our best." 20 years later, the void swarm returned, just as Chancellor Morix had predicted. They came with a force larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, a dark cloud of destruction that blotted out the stars. The Federation prepared to fight, but everyone knew the truth. They did not have enough ships, enough weapons, enough soldiers to stop an enemy of this size. The mathematics were clear and brutal. They would lose. On Earth, in the old chambers where human leaders had met for thousands of years, a decision was made. It was not a decision of generals or admirals. It was a decision of everyone, every human being who could cast a vote. They would fight anyway. The human fleets gathered at the edge of Federation space, their ships painted with the names of everyone who had fallen in the battles before. Persistence, endurance, defiance, courage, hope. Captain Elizabeth Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive vessel named Never Surrender. She was the granddaughter of James Chen, who had passed away 5 years earlier at the age of 112. He had lived long enough to see humanity become the heart of the Federation. Now his granddaughter carried on his legacy. "All ships," she said into the communication system, "this is Admiral Chen. The void swarm outnumbers us 5-1. Our tactical computers calculate that we have a 7% chance of victory." She paused and a slight smile crossed her face. "I have never liked those computers anyway." A laugh rippled through the fleet, a very human sound of defiance in the face of doom. Today we fight for everyone we have ever loved, for every species in the Federation, for every world that has ever given us shelter or friendship. We fight because that is what we do. We fight because we are human and we do not know any other way. The Void Swarm was approaching now, a massive wall of darkness that seemed to swallow the light itself. There are those who say that persistence is foolish, Admiral Chen continued. That sometimes the smart thing to do is to run away and live to fight another day. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps we are fools. She stood straighter, her eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. But we are human fools, and this is our stand. The fleet surged forward, every ship at full power, weapons charging, shields at maximum. They were a tiny spark of light rushing to meet an ocean of darkness. Behind them, the Federation watched and waited. On 1,000 different worlds, beings of every species held their breath and prayed to their various gods for a miracle. The first clash was devastating. Human ships exploded like stars going nova, their crews dying in the cold void of space. But for every ship that fell, another took its place. For every gap in the line, someone rushed to fill it. Hours passed. The human fleet was decimated, then rebuilt with reinforcements, then decimated again. Still they fought. The Void Swarm began to slow. Their advance, which had seemed unstoppable, was being ground down by the sheer stubbornness of the human defense. Every inch of space was contested. Every destroyed ship was avenged. And then something strange happened. The Federation ships began to arrive. Not just a few ships, but thousands of them. Every species that had once feared humanity now raced to fight alongside them. The Kelthians came with their ancient warships. The Thuric brought their swarm fleets. The Vortons, the Melians, the dozens of smaller species who had joined the Federation over the centuries, all of them came. Admiral Chen, a voice crackled over the communication system. It was Admiral Yanara, old now but still commanding, still fighting. The Federation stands with humanity today. Elizabeth Chen felt tears running down her cheeks, but her voice was steady when she replied. Then let us show the Void Swarm what persistence really means. The combined fleet struck the Void Swarm like a hammer. The battle raged for 3 days without pause. Ships were destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed again. Crews fought until they could not fight anymore, then found the strength to fight some more. On the 3rd day, the Void Swarm broke. They did not retreat this time. They fled, scattering into the depths of space, driven by a terror that they had never known before. They had faced the persistence of humanity, and they had learned why the galaxy feared it. They would not return for 1,000 years. The celebration lasted for weeks. On every world in the Federation, beings of every species danced and sang and wept with joy. They had survived. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything that said it was impossible, they had survived. Elizabeth Chen stood on the bridge of the Never Surrender and watched the stars. The ship was damaged, barely holding together, but it was still flying. Like humanity itself, it refused to give up. Her communication officer approached her with a message. It was from Chancellor Torix, the great-grandson of Chancellor Morix, who now led the Federation Council. Admiral Chen, the message read, the Federation wishes to thank humanity for everything you have done. Without your persistence, we would not be here today. We were wrong to fear you. You are the best of us. Elizabeth read the message twice, then set it aside. She did not need thanks. She had not fought for gratitude or recognition. She had fought because she was human, and that was what humans did. A young officer approached her looking nervous. Admiral, the crew is asking what we do now. The war is over. Elizabeth smiled, thinking of her grandfather and all the generations of humans who had come before her. She thought of the first human who had looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. She thought of everyone who had ever faced an impossible challenge and refused to give up. Now, she said, we go home, we rest, we heal, and then we keep going. The young officer looked confused. Keep going where, Admiral? Elizabeth pointed out the viewport at the vast expanse of unexplored space that lay beyond Federation territory. Everywhere, she said. There is always more to discover, more to learn, more to do. The universe is infinite, and so is human curiosity. She turned to face her crew, these brave men and women who had followed her into hell and back. The Void Swarm thought they could break us. They thought that if they hit us hard enough, often enough, we would eventually give up. They did not understand that giving up is not something we know how to do. She paused, letting her words sink in. The galaxy feared our persistence. They were right to be afraid, but now they know something else. They know that our persistence is not just for ourselves. It is for everyone. When we refuse to give up, we refuse to give up on anyone, and that makes us stronger than any enemy we will ever face. The crew cheered, their voices echoing through the battered ship. They were tired and wounded and far from home, but they were still standing. And they would keep standing, no matter what the universe threw at them. Because that was what humans did. That was what they would always do. The stars shone cold and bright in the darkness of space, full of mysteries and dangers and wonders beyond imagination. Somewhere out there, new challenges waited, new enemies, new friends. Elizabeth Chen turned her ship toward home, knowing that this was not the end. It was never the end. For humanity, it was always just another beginning. And they would face it the same way they faced everything else. With persistence, with hope, with the absolute refusal to ever give up. The Galactic Federation had once feared human persistence above everything. Now they thank the stars for it every day. And together, human and alien, they reached for tomorrow. Because tomorrow was always worth fighting for. The universe stretched out before them, infinite and full of possibility. And humanity reached for it with both hands, ready to grab hold and never let go. That was their gift. That was their curse. That was their greatest strength. Persistence above all else. Forever and always. Until the last star went dark and beyond. And even then, probably, they would find a way to keep going. Because they were human. And humans never quit.